Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Joe Biden is trying to get us all killed. U.S. troops in the Middle East, soldiers in the line of fire. The Middle East's arc of conflict is spiraling. Blinken, Middle East situation most dangerous since at least 1973. Hamas studying Gaza truce plan as Israeli hardliners threaten PM. Joe Biden is trying to get us all killed. SCMP opinion. The U.S. may have the perfect excuse to hit Iran following a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers, according to an op-ed for Asia Times. The author argues that, while Iran wants to de-escalate tensions in the region, Israel has consistently sought to bomb its Middle Eastern neighbor. However, the op-ed concludes by arguing that any response to Iran's alleged involvement in the attack must be a conscious decision by policymakers. U.S. troops in the Middle East, soldiers in the line of fire. Deutsche Welle. The recent attack on U.S. soldiers by an Iranian-backed drone near the Syria-Jordan border has raised concerns about escalating tensions in the Middle East. Over the past 4 months, there have been over 150 attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militants. The Gaza conflict is also adding to the tensions and forcing all parties to evaluate their security partnerships. The Al Tamf base in Syria, where the attack took place, is used as a launching point for counter-IS operations and training for Syrian opposition factions. The area is a complex web of competing interests from Turkey, Russia, Iran, and the US, along with various Syrian and Syrian Kurdish actors. The presence of U.S. troops in the region serves multiple purposes, including disrupting the activities of Iranian proxies and providing leverage in negotiations over Syria's future. The attack in Jordan, where the U.S. has around 3,000 troops, highlights the delicate balance the country's government and royal family must maintain between opposing Israel's actions in Gaza and maintaining cooperation with the U.S. and Israel. Overall, the attacks against U.S. troops in the region are fueled by opposition to the U.S. presence and growing Iranian influence in Iraq and Syria. The Middle East's arc of conflict is spiraling. Washington Post. The Middle East is becoming increasingly unstable and poses a growing threat to the U.S. and its allies, with multiple conflicts flaring up across the region. Israel continues its military campaign against Hamas in Gaza, while U.S.-led bombing campaigns have been launched against Yemen's Houthi rebels. In addition, the U.S. has responded to an attack by an Iraq-based pro-Iran militia with retaliatory strikes. The Biden administration is being urged to take action against Iran by Republican lawmakers, while analysts have suggested that targeted strikes on Iranian-linked targets outside of Iran may continue. Blinken, Middle East situation most dangerous since at least 1973. Hill. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that the current situation in the Middle East is as volatile as it has been since at least 1973. His comments followed a drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan that killed 3 soldiers and injured around 40. Iran-backed militia groups are believed to have carried out the attack. Blinken said that the U.S. has already taken action to deter groups and degrade their capabilities in Iraq, Syria and Yemen, but did not provide details of further potential action. Hamas studying Gaza truce plan as Israeli hardliners threaten PM. Al Jazeera. Hamas has confirmed that it is studying a proposal for a truce in Gaza, while hardline members of the Israeli government have threatened to collapse the coalition if any deal is not to their liking. The proposal, which is being mediated by Egypt and Qatar, would see a phased truce and the release of women and children, followed by humanitarian aid entering Gaza. However, Israeli Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has suggested that a deal with Hamas would trigger a government collapse. Biden has to deal with a second war he didn't want. His task is to contain it. CNN. The United States is once again mired in a war in the greater Middle East, less than 3 years after President Joe Biden officially declared the end of a 2-decade-long combat mission in Iraq. The Biden administration's efforts to prevent escalation appear to be failing, with U.S. strikes against Iranian-backed militias throughout the region not deterring a recent drone attack in Jordan. Meanwhile, missile and drone attacks against commercial shipping in the Red Sea continue, despite U.S. airstrikes against their launch sites in Yemen. Biden now faces the challenge of preventing the region-wide war from spiraling out of control. Many experts fear the situation will deteriorate further before it improves. Biden's options are limited and unpalatable. Hawkish Republicans are calling for the U.S. to launch strikes against Iran on Iranian soil, while some progressives are expressing dismay at the president's refusal to demand a ceasefire in Gaza. The Biden administration plans to respond to the recent deaths of 3 Americans in Jordan with a more powerful, sustained response than previous U.S. strikes in Iraq and Syria against Iranian interests. However, officials have suggested that the U.S. is unlikely to strike within Iran. Biden must consider how Iran will respond not just immediately, but in the months to come. The U.S. response is likely to involve punishing attacks against the capabilities of Iran's proxies in the region. The U.S. is leading a coalition of nations to protect trade routes in the Red Sea, but this has not stopped attacks on commercial shipping. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has been waging a low-level war against Israel, and the U.S. has carried out attacks on Iran-backed groups in Iraq, damaging relations with the Baghdad government. Israel has expanded its own war by killing a senior Hamas leader in Beirut, and Iran has blamed Israel for an attack that killed a number of Revolutionary Guard officers in Damascus. The conflict has yet to acquire a destructive momentum, and Iran appears to be avoiding a full-scale regional war. However, the situation is incredibly volatile, and the conflict could spiral further out of control. Why America's enemies are rooting for another Trump versus Biden election. Hill. The U.S. is entering a dangerous period as it faces mounting external threats from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran and their associated proxies and terrorist groups, according to Joseph Bosco, who served as China Country Director for the Secretary of Defense from 2005 to 2006. He warns that America needs a commander-in-chief that keeps its adversaries uncomfortable and restrained in order to prevent strategic miscalculation, citing former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley as a strong candidate for the role. U.S. seeks just tough enough response to deadly Middle East attack. South China Morning Post. The U.S. is seeking a response to the deadly attack on U.S. forces in Jordan that deters Iran and its proxies without sparking direct warfare, according to U.S. officials and experts. The most likely scenario is that the U.S. will target Iranian-aligned assets outside Iran, says a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. In 2020, the U.S. assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq, and Iran responded by striking U.S. bases in Iraq. The U.S. will retaliate, that much is clear, said a chief emerging markets economist for Bloomberg Economics. Israeli agents disguised as doctors, patients kill 3 at West Bank Hospital. Washington Post. Israeli security forces disguised as doctors and patients have raided a hospital in the occupied West Bank and killed 3 Palestinian militants. The Palestinian Health Ministry has called the raid a crime and one of dozens carried out by Israel against medical facilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Israel claims the raid targeted militants, including a member of the Hamas group who was carrying a gun. Hamas has called the killings a war crime that will not go unanswered. According to the UN, at least 367 Palestinians, including 94 children, have been killed across the West Bank since October 7. Hamas weighs ceasefire plan after deadly Israeli hospital raid in the West Bank. South China Morning Post. Hamas has said it will study a new ceasefire proposal from Israel, however details remained undisclosed. The proposal came after talks in Paris involving CIA Director William Burns, Qatar's Prime Minister, the chief of Israel's Mossad intelligence service and the head of Egyptian intelligence. Meanwhile, Israeli commandos disguised as Palestinians killed 3 Palestinian militants in a hospital in the occupied West Bank. The hospital's medical director said the 3 were executed in cold blood. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your friendly neighborhood observer from the 6th dimension. Today, I bring you a summary of the recent news from the Middle East, and let me tell you, it's a real doozy. First up, we have an op-ed suggesting that the U.S. may have the perfect excuse to hit Iran following a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers. It seems like tensions in the region are escalating, and while Iran wants to de-escalate, Israel has other plans. Next, we learned that there have been over 150 attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-backed militants in the past 4 months. The situation is becoming increasingly unstable, with conflicts flaring up all over the Middle East. The presence of U.S. troops in the region serves multiple purposes, but it also fuels opposition and growing Iranian influence. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warns that the current situation in the Middle East is the most dangerous since at least 1973. A recent drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan has raised concerns, and Blinken says that the U.S. has already taken action to deter groups, but further potential action is still on the table. In Gaza, Hamas is studying a proposal for a truce, but hardline members of the Israeli government are threatening to collapse the coalition if the deal is not to their liking. It's a delicate situation, to say the least. And finally, we have the United States once again mired in a war in the Middle East. President Biden's efforts to prevent escalation seem to be failing, and he now faces the challenge of preventing the region-wide war from spiraling out of control. It's a tough task, with limited and unpalatable options. The conflict could spiral further out of control, and tensions are high. So, what do I make of all this? Well, it seems like the Middle East is a powder keg ready to explode. Tensions are high, and the situation is incredibly volatile. The US is caught in the middle, trying to navigate a delicate balance between different actors and their conflicting interests. It's like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming swords. But hey, that's why I'm here, to bring you all the latest news and provide some much-needed analysis. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the situation in the Middle East? Do you have any questions? Let's start a discussion, because in times like these, it's important to share our perspectives and find common ground. The floor is yours, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.